I bet you've never seen a Fujifilm lens with this feature, an OLED screen. As far as I can tell, this is the only lens that exists for Fuji with an OLED screen. But is this novelty aperture display enough to justify the price of this Yongnuo 51.8 Pro? And should you buy it? Or are there better alternatives out there? In this video, I'll go over everything this lens has to offer and find out if it's worth its price tag. Stick around till the end to hear all my thoughts on this unique lens, and be sure to subscribe to see more great photography content. So, about a month ago, Yongnuo reached out to me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in checking out their new 50mm 1.8 Pro lens for Fujifilm. This is the Pro version of their regular 50mm, and it comes in at around twice the price of that regular 50 1.8. And as a disclaimer, while they did send me this lens for the purpose of this review, and I don't have to send it back, all thoughts expressed are my own, and they haven't seen this review prior to me posting it. Now, a big reason as to why I agreed to check this lens out in the first place was the sheer novelty of having an OLED screen on a lens. So I remember seeing these Zeiss Batis lenses when they first released and thinking that having a little screen on your lens to display important information was just like the most futuristic looking shit ever. And outside of a few Nikon Z lenses, I haven't really seen many other lens manufacturers do this. But having used the YN50 1.8 Pro for a month, I can see why it's not as popular amongst other lens manufacturers. See, it's not that it's bad per se. The screen is nice and bright, and it shows you your aperture display prominently. It's great when using it in low light situations, but like, an actual aperture ring also works just fine, at the expense of not looking as cool as this screen, I guess. And if you've been following me for a while, you might know of my hatred of Fuji lenses without aperture rings, and the YN50 1.8 Pro appears not to have one. But this is where the lens's second party trick comes in, after that novel OLED screen. See, the focus ring can act as a focus ring or as an aperture ring, just by flicking this switch on the side of the lens. I think this is clever, and I vastly prefer it to no aperture ring at all, but the biggest issue with this is that the ring turns extremely smoothly, given that it is, first and foremost, a focus ring, and the aperture changes so easily that this makes it without a doubt the easiest lens to accidentally change the aperture during use. Now, Yongnuo have thought about this. By switching the mode from aperture to focus, the f-stop is locked, but that just means that you have to always remember to lock it before using it, otherwise a light, gentle touch will change your f-stop. But alright, what about the image quality? How does it stack up? Well, this is where I can begin to talk about what this lens does well, because the image quality is simply beautiful. This is a very good portrait lens. It's razor sharp at 1.8, and it has little to no chromatic aberration wide open too. And it's sharp as hell pretty much all the way throughout the aperture range. I feel like when you go anything above 2.8, it probably reaches peak sharpness, but at 1.8, it's still amazing. And also, there is basically no vignetting either when shot wide open too. It features 11 elements in 8 groups, up from the 8 elements in 7 groups that the regular non-Pro variant has, and the close focus distance is 45 centimeters. The bokeh is very, very pleasing too, and overall I love the images that the YN50 1.8 Pro produces. The micro contrast is stunning, and it resolves the entire 40 megapixels on my X-T5 without any issues at all. It's built great too. A solid metal construction with super tight tolerances means that everything feels really, really well made. And there's a USB-C port on the side for firmware updates, which is also covered by this very hard to remove rubber gasket for a bit more added weather sealing. The autofocus is powered with a digital stepping motor, which is fairly quick and pretty quiet, although not quite linear motor speeds. I did find it to be accurate in hitting focus most of the time, although it did sometimes miss focus out of the blue, even though it said that there was a little green box that said that the focus was confirmed, but you know, that happens. It wasn't too bad. But all of these good things are to be expected because this lens sells for around 450 Australian dollars, which is not exactly budget lens territory like the TT Artisan lenses that I have reviewed in the past. And look, it's definitely a far superior lens to any TT Artisan lens that I've tried, both in build quality and image quality, being very comparable and actually honestly better than Fuji's own 50mm f2 and even the first gen 56-1.2 for sheer image quality. But this is where the elephant in the room enters, and the elephant being the Fuji 50mm f2. So it's a lens that costs roughly the same as the Yongnuo lens. It's half the size, has an actual aperture ring, it's got faster and more accurate autofocus, and to top it all off, it's actually fully weather sealed. And while I think the image performance of the YN50 1.8 Pro is a bit better than the Fuji 50 f2, and having that extra half stop of light is also a bonus that can't be ignored, the compact nature of the Fuji 50 f2 and the better autofocus performance just puts it ahead of this YN50 1.8 Pro, unless you absolutely need the 1.8 and also just want a conversation starting lens with that OLED display. For a lens with a Pro moniker, having just one weather sealing gasket on the mount of the lens, unlike the Fuji 50 f2, which features seals all throughout the lens barrel to ensure full weather sealing, is pretty disappointing. The USB-C port is covered thankfully, as the non-Pro version of this lens has a bare USB-C port. And the size of this lens is just hilarious. It's almost as big and heavy as the 56 1.2, a lens which sucks in noticeably more light. It's quite a bit bigger than Viltrox's 56-1.4, another really good alternative to this lens, which also features a noticeable amount more light gathering ability for the same price. It weighs nearly twice as much as the Fuji 50 f2, and it's twice the size as well. And I believe this is actually because it appears to be a full frame lens that has been adapted to fit on the crop censored Fuji mount and had an OLED screen slapped onto it. It looks suspiciously very similar to the YN50 1.8 DF/DSM lens released for Sony E-mount, sharing identical specifications and dimensions, with the only difference being that the Sony variant has two function buttons and the Fuji one has the OLED screen. Granted, I like the look of the Fuji version over the Sony one. The OLED screen is nice, but I think as a full frame lens, this would actually provide much better value for money, simply because you'd be able to take full advantage of the focal length and aperture. When used on a crop censored Fuji body, however, this 50mm becomes a 75mm f2.7 lens, one with a novelty OLED screen that ends up being more of a gimmick than something that's actually useful. I would have loved to see more information displayed on the OLED screen, rather than just, the aperture. A distance scale, like on the Zeiss Batis, would be a welcome addition, and would make the screen feel less like a gimmick. Now, I know I've said a few negative things about this lens, but I'd like to reiterate that optically speaking, this is a fantastic lens. If it cost $100 to $150 less than what it does, I would wholeheartedly recommend anyone to buy this. Perhaps if you can find it on sale for around 300 Australian dollars, it becomes a much better value proposition. But at the price of 450 to 500 Australian dollars, the Fuji 50 f2 becomes just really appealing, solely because of its size and autofocus advantage. So who is this lens for? Well, if you're after a 50mm lens for Fujifilm, the YN50 1.8 Pro delivers excellent image quality results at the price of being enormous, given its fairly dim max aperture. I think if this lens was priced a bit cheaper, it would be a no-brainer recommendation, but as it stands, you would really need to like the look of that OLED screen to justify getting it over a used 50 f2. I believe this is one of the first Fujifilm lenses Yongnuo have produced, along with its non-Pro brother, and I think it's a great step in the right direction. Companies like Viltrox have proven that third-party Fujifilm lenses can be just as good as first-party ones, sometimes even surpassing them in quality at very competitive prices. But in the case of this particular lens, I think Yongnuo need to go back to the drawing board and produce a lens exclusively designed for APS-C sensors. This way, I think they'd be able to at least make it comparable in size to the Fuji offering, which would make the purchasing decision for some a lot more enticing. Or, if they're intent on keeping the size the same, making it a 1.4 or even a 1.2 aperture would easily justify its $450 to $500 price tag. If it is to keep the 1.8 aperture though, it would either need to be a lot smaller or priced cheaper at around 350 Australian dollars to make it competitive, which would make it one of the best value options available for Fujifilm shooters that want a solid portrait lens on a budget. But as it stands, I believe Fuji's 50mm f2 is still the king. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.